Well, according to the 2016 Australian Institute of Health and Welfare report, one child dies from stillbirth in Australia every 4 hours. Now, it's a topic that's not often spoke of, and there appears to be little, if any, government funding into improving the current situation. Well, today we're sitting down to chat to Mum, a former New South Wales Premier and current Australian Senator, the Honourable Kristina Keneally. Kristina, thank you so much for coming in to sit down and chat to us.
Thank you.
We wanted to sort of talk to you about your stillbirth journey. Is it something that you thought would happen to you?
Absolutely not. I went through my entire first pregnancy with my first baby, Daniel. Healthy, easy. I thought, I've got this. I know how to do this. I can have kids. And then my second pregnancy did not go that well at all. In fact, my daughter Caroline was stillborn. And I felt so naive and I felt so angry, but particularly naive. I thought, why did nobody tell me this could happen? Why didn't I know about this? How is it possible that in a first world country and a fairly well-educated person, I had no idea how common this is?
Were there signs? Were there signs in you personally or physically that you were experiencing to say maybe something's going on that I should probably
Well, in hindsight, yes. In hindsight, yes. Now, in my daughter's circumstance, I don't think any intervention would have saved her life, sadly. But for many cases of stillbirth, there are things that can be done, interventions that can be made. The real tragedy is there are things that we know that we are not telling parents in pregnancy to look out for, and we're not doing a very good job at investigating stillbirths when they happen so that we know how to prevent them in the future.
So why aren't we doing all of that, telling the parents what they can do?
I think partly because stillbirth for so long has been viewed as a private tragedy, something that happens to a woman, it's inside her body, it's not been viewed as a public health problem, but rather as a private tragedy. I also think it is so terribly sad for people to contemplate that they don't want to enter into that
discussion,
grief and that discussion.
Or even to have to think about that happening to them.
You know, we've had, now in the Senate, we're having an inquiry into stillbirth research and prevention. And one of the mothers who was the mother of a stillborn baby came to us and said, you know, she asked her doctor later, why didn't you tell me about this? He said, well, we don't want to scare mothers. And she made this really great analogy. She said, you know, when you get on an airplane, they tell you the worst thing that could happen. And they tell you how to manage it. She says, now the risk of an airplane crashing is so much less than the risk of a stillbirth. She says, nobody runs from the plane. People continue the plane journey. She said, I would rather have been told so that I could prepare and I could look out for those risks.
I'm just curious a little bit from you personally, right? You know the amount of mom guilt that we all have about anything that happens to our kid, we think it's our fault. How did you deal with the whole thing?
Oh, look, it was incredibly hard, that sense of guilt, because this is your own body. You feel like you have let your own child down in the most, you know, tragic way possible. You know, in my circumstance, and for so many parents, it's not necessarily something you could have done to prevent it. But part of the problem is so many parents come out of stillbirth and they don't have an answer because we don't investigate it. They don't know still why it happened. But what I do know, for me and so many parents who've gone through this, there is that sense of guilt. And one of the ways we can help people deal with it is, one, to prevent them from having to go through it at all, and two, helping them understand when it happens.
So is there a support network for parents who have stillborn or miscarriages?
There are SANS, which is a group that helps parents after the death of a baby or a stillbirth. They do great work. They were very helpful for me 20 years ago, and they're still doing this very valuable work. The Stillbirth Foundation, whilst they're not a support group, they do allow parents to do some things, raise money, you know, help promote public health messages and get involved. And I suppose this is the thing, most of the money that's been raised for stillbirth research has come from parents of stillborn babies.
Done that. So how did you, in your sort of own personal journey, put one foot in front of the other and continue on?
Yeah, I was very depressed, not surprisingly, for a very long time. But I had a 13-month-old baby a son who wasn't even old enough to know that he had had a sister, and he needed his mother to get up every day. And there were some days it was very hard to get out of bed. I was very angry at God for a very long time.
I was going to ask you about your faith and how that sort of wore through that journey.
Yeah, I was incredibly angry with God. And, at one hand, I felt a great sense of comfort that my daughter was with God. I believe that as a Christian, and that was quite comforting. But on the other hand, shouldn't a baby be with her mother? Why is my baby not with me? And I didn't necessarily think God was going to intervene to give me a healthy pregnancy. I didn't think that that was something that God should have done, particularly. I suppose, though, if I think about it, there was a point at which I came to a realization that God is neither mother nor father. It can be both. God can be both. God is neither male nor female. We often think of God as a father, but God is also a mother. And God is a mother whose child died. God's child, Jesus, died. And it didn't make everything better for me, but it gave me an understanding that, bad things happen in the world, tragedy happens, and God, as a mother, must love the world and love me so much that she allowed her own child to die for humanity. And that just gave me a sense that God walks with my pain and understands and loves. And no, God doesn't intervene to make everything perfect, but God is there for us when things go wrong.
Yeah. So how did you and your husband sort of work through this together? Like, were you a support for each other? Did you sort of have to look outside of that outside of your marriage for support?
I had a great social worker through the public health care system. I had our local parish priest who was really magnificent in terms of doing a blessing for Caroline when she died. We had a good family friend who was a priest who did her funeral. Stillbirth affects mothers and fathers differently.
I was going to say, and how was your partner and your husband in...
Well, I think he had the sense that many fathers do, that they have to look after the family. Somebody had to go to work. I was certainly not capable of doing those things. And he had to be strong for me and for our son. But also, I was the one who had felt my daughter moving inside of me. I had an intimate relationships that dads sometimes will struggle to have with any pregnancy until a baby is born. And that made it very... meant our grief was experienced differently.
You mentioned your son earlier, and it's a topic that we've discussed here, and it's sort of a hard one. How do you explain something like that to your son?
Well, as I said, he was too young at the time to understand. I suppose what we've done is to always talk about Caroline. We've never we just talked about her. We visited her. We visit her grave on her birthday or on important holidays.
And you've had a child since Caroline?
Yes, so I've had another son, Brendan.
Right.
And so the boys know that she is part of the family. Whenever we have a family marriage or funeral, she's part of the prayers and acknowledged. It's just, she is my second child.
Yes.
I speak about her in those terms, and she's just not with us.
What was your pregnancy with Brendan like? I can imagine it would have been filled with fear and trepidation.
Well, this is a really good point, Melody, that so many parents in their subsequent pregnancies just have this real fear. For me, there was the relief to find out he didn't have the same condition that she had, but then there's still the fear of course, am I going to get through this? And that real relief. I remember bringing him home thinking, I have waited so long to have another baby at home, to have two babies at home, and it just was, such an incredibly sad journey. It was a bittersweet moment to bring him home.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You mentioned earlier that the Senate's looking into this. What sort of are they focusing on?
Well, we're looking at two things. What are the ways that we can reduce stillbirth in Australia through healthcare,
Because the
research,
stats are still
and
pretty
education?
high for a Western developed country.
Australia does not do well on this. Other nations in the last decade, the Netherlands, the UK, New Zealand, they have all taken clear steps to prioritise stillbirth reduction. And it's not that complicated. It's better healthcare. It's talking to parents about the fact that it can happen, talking with, getting clinicians to talk to parents about what are the risks and things they should be monitoring, and then understanding who it happens to and why. When we start to investigate stillbirth overseas, we start to realize in certain, certain ethnic groups, perhaps letting people go beyond 39 weeks presents a higher risk than it does for other groups.
Right.
And so it's about understanding that. I would say for people watching at home, a few things that we're not particularly telling parents right now. One, get to know your baby's movements. And if those movements change significantly, get to your doctor or to a hospital, because that can often be a warning sign that something's going wrong in the pregnancy. Secondly, we do know that sleeping on your side in pregnancy, while it will not completely prevent a stillbirth, it does help reduce the risk.
Yeah.
Does it? On the side?
Really?
Yeah.
I was drilled. by
really?
my obstetrician to sleep on my side, because sometimes you're comfortable on your back. And
Yeah, the back is
they were like, look, whatever you do, whether it's a left or right, just sleep on your side.
That's right.
Wow.
Okay, look, just quickly, because I know you've been able to go through this journey over some time. If someone was at the beginning of this journey that you've been through, what would you say to them?
Well, I'd say don't be afraid to find out what can happen in a pregnancy. If you are pregnant, and to be informed with information is your best chance of delivering a healthy baby. If you have just had a stillbirth, every family is different, and every family is going to experience this grief differently. But for those families, perhaps the most comforting thing to do is to acknowledge that this baby is part of your family.
Yeah.
Speak of them, celebrate the milestones of whether it's a subsequent child, and to mark that your stillborn child's birth.
I think that's really lovely advice. And look, if this has affected our conversation has affected you today, please contact Beyond Blue or Lifeline. There is someone there that is happy to talk to you. Kristina, thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with us today. We really appreciate that and going through all of that with us.
Thank you.
And ladies, it is always a pleasure having you on board. Good to chat. Don't forget, if you want to jump onto our social media and have your say, we'll see you next week.